everybody, in this video we're going to be talking about the OTA changes coming this Thursday. What are we expecting? Also, in that same mold, given the Guardians of the Galaxy movie coming out, the season pass coming, we're also going to suggest some changes. Now, some of these will require a balance update to the Guardian cards, which I think could actually make a specific archetype deck, which would be a lot of fun to play around. So make sure to stick around for that at the end. If you find any of this stuff helpful, we're pushing for 1,000 subscribers on the channel, so please consider sharing with aunts, uncles, nieces, nephews, or hammer down that like button. All right, let's jump into it. If you missed it, Second Dinner said they're going to be doing weekly OTA, which means over the air changes the cards, which essentially means they can change the cost of a card or the power of a card. So I'm going to start going over these every week as a potential changes, things we'd like to see. Definitely let me know what your thoughts are on all of these potentials in the comments below. First one, Sandman. Super annoying card right now. Everyone hates it. The initial change I'd do here would be 5/4. I think this might be able to drop to a 5/3, but right now I would make this as a 5/4 to take a little bit of power out of Sandman. Next up is Baron Mordo. This card actually could use a rework, and as far as this week's OTA list, I'd have this at the bottom. I'd change this one to a 2/4 to make it just a little bit more powerful. Next up is Hawkeye. This card I think could get a little bit of an adjustment. I would make this a 1/2. It's an okay card that essentially never gets played. It's a small rescue where if you play on it, you get a couple more points. A 1/3 is not that great. A 1/4 is actually really good, and I think would make Hawkeye played a ton. Sweet Wonderful Wave. I hate even saying this, but Wave gets played a ton. I would take at least one power away from her, making her a 3/2. And I still think she'd play just as much as she's get played now, which means it's probably a good change. Sweet Nimrod, just a destroy card from a season pass that just is not really doing much at the moment. So I would actually like to change this one to a 4/5. I think you keep the 5, because originally I was thinking about a 4/4, but then it only doubles to 8 if you do double it at all, and then you can't shang it or get the advantage of somebody shanging it, which I think is actually a fun thing to do. So I think I'd leave it as 5 power, but change it to a 4 cost. This allows you to get it a little bit earlier in the game and potentially split it a couple times. Orca, the best card in the game, which is part of the reason why I put a pixel in here. So one of the things we talked about was actually maybe doubling this card if it was the only card at its location. I think that would be sort of fun. If I was to have that one, I'd make this a 6/8 instead of a 6/9. Even at 16 as a double, I think that's fantastic. But if you're going to play it by itself in a lane, I'd make it a 6/8. But the change for this one for now, because this is not a balance patch discussion, I would change this to a 6/10. This one I'm doing, I have to admit, because I'm excited about the potential for a move meta. So I'm not fully convinced of this one, but I want to throw it out there. Originally, I wanted to make this a 1/2, but then Heligar made a point in the Discord, link in the description below, that then makes Kraven susceptible to Killmonger, which is a great point, which I wasn't thinking about at the time. And I'm like, I just want this card to be able to be played a little earlier in a move deck, but if you make it 0, and then it's too OP, and then if you make it 1, Killmonger gets it, so, and then you've already got the problem with Human Torch and Killmonger. So for this one in particular, I think I'd leave it at 2 cost, but maybe add 3 power. So it's 2/3. So not add 2 power, but make it a 3 power. This card can get huge if played right, but I'd like to see a couple more opportunities to get a few good big cards and move, and I was trying to do that with Kraven. So 2/3. Let me know what your thoughts are on this one a little bit in the comments below as well. This next one's a little bit more for fun. We were talking, and again, shout out to Peachy on this one. We were talking about making this a 9/13, mainly for the unlucky number of 13. It's death, you know, just sort of playing in that theme, but I thought it was kind of cool. But that also made us start talking about, well, what about the cost, changing it to 10? Now, I started debating maybe that would make this card too hard to play, but then I was thinking about, well, it's super easy to play with a Galactus, so maybe it would be good as a 10/13 and making it a little bit harder to play on that last turn, so you might not be able to play that null death combo with Galactus, which might help some people who are frustrated with Galactus just getting smashed that last turn and not having priority to be able to Shang-Chi anything. Let me know what your thoughts are on that in the comments below for sure. Some other possibilities, I'd say Angel, 2/3. Let's make this a 2/3. No one ever really plays Angel. We also discussed a rework to it where it could also bounce out if it's in your hand and not just your deck, which I think is a good point. Now, I see Angel's got some great variants. It'd be awesome to see this guy be able to be played more. Morph is one I threw in there. I would change this to 2/0. He never gets played. It's unfortunate that all his variants you can't see either because he changes to a different card. But I think at 2/0, he's more likely to be played not just early, but potentially late in games, which could be a lot more fun. done. This one I would have at the bottom of the list as well. I think that Lockjaw, he just got changed. I don't think they've got enough information on this yet, and they talked in their post that they needed, I think, a week or two to make the OTA changes. So they have not seen enough here. I want to put this in everyone's head because I do see less Lockjaws, so I'm wondering if maybe he needs a little adjustment to his cost to be able to be used a little bit more. I don't know. I don't want to make him back into a Thanos deck and make it OP, so I'm a little reserved there, but I wanted to throw that thought out there. Last but not least, before we get into the Guardians, is Nakia. I think Nakia could be a 2/2 and still be fine. I think make her a little cheaper. When you're able to make those sort of changes to a card and you still feel good, like it's not too OP or too weak, that I think is a good change. Future stuff we'll look at. Let me know what you want to see in the future below as well, but we got Fury, Forge, Punisher, Ronin, Captain America, Crystal rework, and Baku. Those are some of the other ones we're sort of talking about, but let's get into the Guardians of the Galaxy. As I mentioned earlier, we have this season pass coming. So that means there's a lot of stuff focused on the Guardians, and I think this gives Second Dinner an opportunity to rework some of these Guardian cards as well, because the truth is these Guardian cards are not that exciting and you don't see get played very often. I've got them all here, and I've got some suggestions for some adjustments to these cards. And at the end of this, I think this could be a specific archetype that isn't necessarily about guessing where your opponent's going to play, but with some adjustments to this deck, which I'll get to a deck in a second, a full deck, I think you could actually start manipulating potentially where your opponent's going to play and try to thrive off that to make your side of the board a little bit better. Because right now, really the only way to do this is you got Daredevil and then you play Gamora on turn 5. That is pretty much all you see of any of these Guardians. Every once in a while, you'll see a Mantis or a Rocket. You don't really see many Star-Lords or Groots, some Draxes, which to me means this whole archetype or this deck type needs a rework, and I think this could work. Before I get into some of those specific changes, I want to mention so that you're aware, the Nebula, the way she's going to work, each turn your opponent does not play a card here, she will get +2 power. So that means it incentivizes your opponent to play there, which means you could take advantage of that with your Guardians cards. With that in mind, here are some suggestions. This first one, I don't love. I threw it out there before I thought about the rest of them. I'm not fully convinced of this. I thought maybe Mantis is a 1/3, but I think with the rest of these changes, that might be a little too OP. So I would probably leave it as a 1/2, but I did think about it up front. I would not change Rocket at all, leave him alone. Star-Lord, I would do this. I would leave the power as is, the cost as is. I would actually balance patch update this one so that if your opponent does play a card here this turn or potentially either of the next 2 turns, then this gets +3. So you've got a window of 3 turns to gain those +3. That might be too big, so I would maybe say this or next turn you get the +3, but I think the concept of getting that +3 either the turn you play it, so you're not guessing, and or the next turn, I think that's a big boost. Groot, I would change to a 2/3, and I would also change an ability on it. I would change this on reveal, that when you play Groot, it prevents your opponent from playing a card here next turn, but it cannot be played on turn 5 or 6. So you've got to play it anywhere between turn 2, 3, and 4. That also helps you push cards toward things like a Star-Lord or maybe a Drax at a different location. And you can start seeing how you can push and pull your opponent to play different locations, and you trying to take advantage of that with these cards. And given the Guardians theme, I think that's sort of fun to try to play these guys all together. Drax, I would up this to a 4/6. No other changes. Just make it a little bit more powerful. No changes to Gamora at all. I think she's fine. Leave as is. So you can see you can start moving some of these cards around. You can dictate where your opponent plays a little bit. And again, Nebula helps with this. And this is coming, and she's part of that Guardians team. So that means you've basically got you've got 5 other spots for cards. So my suggestion for the full deck of a Guardians deck here, I would throw in Daredevil, help you on that turn 5, potentially with the Gamora, right? Also, you'd throw in Professor X because of that, because if you don't pull your Gamora, you've got another card for potential lockdown. To limit the spaces people can play even more, maybe you throw down a Storm. Not just that, but it helps you predict a spot someone might play. So maybe you Storm, and then you Star-Lord. Storm on 3, Star-Lord on where Storm is. Maybe you put Groot at a different location, so it focuses them on one spot the next turn. You maybe don't have Daredevil, and then you could play your Drax and or Gamora there. So you're really starting to manipulate where these cards are being played during the game. I throw Arrow in there for some just card manipulation, controlling the board, just making sure you know where they go. And then I threw in America Chavez just to sort of thin that deck out a little bit. If you need her on the final turn, she's there, decent output, but you're getting all these other cards to play there. I think this could actually be a fairly strong deck. I just did this in theory and concept here, thinking about all of these changes this morning. Let me know what your thoughts are on a Guardian control type lockdown deck. And I think that's what I'd call this, is Guardian lockdown. I would love to play this. I think it makes an archetype of cards that are basically never used together. And I think the Guardians should be used together, lore, the movie, all that sort of thing. Second dinner, what do you think? Any changes here? Are these too tough to make? Is it too late? I don't know. Let me know what everybody's thoughts are in the comments below. Again, if this has been helpful for you or you found it entertaining at all, please consider hammering down that like button. We'll be doing more of these in the future. And until next time, I hope you have a wonderful day.